Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of a Meezan lecture series. So, in this series, we are studying Ustaz Javed Ghamidi's book Meezan, also found in English by the title Islam: A Comprehensive Introduction. This book actually is his understanding of the contents of Islam. We have been studying its various chapters, and currently we are studying one of the preambles to this book, which relates to the fundamental principles. And amongst these principles, of course, is the source of religion and how we understand these sources that emanate from that single source. We had posited that Ustaz Ghamidi says that the only source of religion is Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and through him the content of religion has been given to us in the form of the Qur'an and the Sunnah. As far as Hadith is concerned, these are basically narrations that were compiled and transmitted initially by the Sahaba on their own initiative. And because of the fact that they relate the prophetic knowledge, so it is important to also critically evaluate them and to understand them. And they form a speculative source of knowledge, which means that they are not definitive the way the Quran and the Sunnah are. The Quran and the Sunnah have been transmitted through perpetuation, concurrent perpetuation, also called tawatur, which means that the content of these two sources is rendered absolutely infallible. So we have been studying the principles of understanding the Quran, and as far as these principles are concerned, we had finished the first three principles, which of course are being displayed now before you. Appreciation of classical Arabic, eloquence of language, uniqueness of style. So we had finished off these three, and in fact we had also done a major portion of the fourth one, which relates to the final authority, which of course means that the Quran is the final authority. Now there are certain questions that had arisen because of which it was said that perhaps the Quran's final authority, the status of the Quran's final authority is challenged. And we had seen some of those questions, like the intentionality of the text, like for example the issue of the muhkam and the mutashabih verses of the Quran, and also the variant readings. Finally, we have now come to the fourth important area of interest, which seemingly abrogates the Quran or maybe alters the Quran, and as a result it actually challenges the status of the final authority. So Ustaz Ghamidi has replied to this aspect, because he says that as far as hadith literature is concerned, you will not find a single hadith which is outside of the ambit of the Quran and the Sunnah, as far as that narration is concerned, if it is reported correctly. And if there is a narration which looks to be outside of the ambit of the Quran, or maybe it is adding something, or maybe even abrogating something of the Quran from the Quran, then it is not because of the fact that it actually alters or abrogates the Quran. It is only because we have not been able to understand those narratives. So in reality, no hadith has ever abrogated a Quranic verse or even confined its scope of application. And thus there arises no doubt from this angle on the status of the Quran as the final authority. And we have seen that this final authority has been depicted by the Quran by the words Furqan and Meezan. So as I was just referred to, that when people were not able to understand certain stylistic features of the Quran and the background and perspective of certain Quranic verses, so they were not able to understand the words of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, also regarding these areas. And they actually ended up surmising that now Prophet has given separate independent directives than the Quran, and at times these directives limit the scope of the Quranic directives, and at times they even alter them drastically or abrogate them. So Ustaz Ghamidi has basically chosen the six major ahadiths which seem to have challenged this status of the Quran as the final authority, because these six ahadiths, which we will study one by one, they seem to add or abrogate the Quran, and as such, therefore, if it is so, then there is no other alternative but to accept them. However, Ustaz Ghamidi says that if we deliberate on these ahadiths, or what the Prophet has said, then you will understand that he has not gone beyond the words of the Quran in any instance, in any scope, in any way. It is just our understanding which at times has not been able to make us relate it or these ahadiths to the Quran. So in all circumstances, the ahadiths that we will be studying as he has pointed out, they all are under they fall under the ambit of the Quran, and therefore they in no way change, alter, or abrogate it. Now, the first of these ahadith relates to the prophetic saying, in which it is said that, of course, the Prophet, the Quran, of course, has prohibited certain edibles, and we will just study them. But the thing is that there are narratives of the Prophet which seemingly say a different thing, or at least they add to the edibles that have been prohibited by the Quran. And for example, there is a narrative which says that the Prophet prohibited animals which have canine teeth, and birds which have claws that can, of course, bite and pick up their prey and tear them apart. So this seems to be an addition, and then there are similar other narratives as well. So, in this regard, Ustaz Ghamidi has tried to present his view regarding what is edible and what is not edible, and he'll be showing, and as we will be going through his text also and the way he has presented it, that whatever is presented by the Prophet regarding edibles, it is subsumed under this category of the Quran, or at times it is also an expression of human nature. So he says that the animals which God has created on this earth, some are meant to be eaten and others are not. So this is something that is absolutely a fact, that these latter type of animals, if eaten, which are not meant to be eaten, for example, lions and tigers and vultures, they affect the tazkiyah, or spiritual purification of a person. And therefore, an aversion to them, an abhorrence to them is found in his nature. And generally, human nature provides a person with ample guidance in this matter, and without any hesitation, he is able to decide the right and wrong course. He very well knows, I mean, all of us know that lions and tigers, elephants, eagles, crows, vultures, kites, snakes, scorpions, human flesh itself are not meant to be eaten. So human beings are well aware of the fact that horses and mules are basically means of transportation, and they have no role in satisfying one's hunger. The feces and urine of animals are impure things, and is known to all human beings that, of course, they should not be consumed. But yes, at times human nature becomes perverted, and a study of human behavior shows that a great majority of people does not generally falter in this matter. Generally, they are absolutely aware of it. It is for this reason that the Sharia has not given any original guidance on this matter. It does not enlist the number of things that are prohibited, because it has left this to our nature, and it stresses that everything appropriate for eating, which is in its own terminology called tayyibat, which means tayyib lit-ta'am, something which is appropriate and perfectly wholesome for eating, is something that human beings will always consume. And opposite to that is the word khabais, which means something which is not appropriate or wholesome for eating. And it has left this matter for human nature to decide. So the Sharia has provided guidance on animals and on things related to animals, in which it was difficult for human beings, purely on the basis of their intellect and nature, to decide the right course. So if you look at the four prohibited things, or the three prohibited things that we'll be just enumerating, you'll see that this is something which the Sharia has only provided because there could have been confusion regarding these three or four things. The rest of the things which it has not enumerated at all, it has left those things to human nature, because human nature is perfectly capable of deciding its own course. Now, the question is, for example, the Quran says that the swine or the pig is prohibited. Now, the fact is that, I mean, we could have had two reasons regarding the prohibition of swine, because of the fact that it is also carnivorous and it's also herbivorous. It consumes meat also, and it consumes vegetables. So if looked at it in one way, it is like a beast, and it is of the same genre as a lion or other things which actually consume meat by tearing apart their prey. And if you look at from another instance, you'll find it because it also consumes vegetation and grass. It is like goat, sheep, and cows and camels. But the thing is that the question would be that, because generally the carnivores have been prohibited because they create savagery in a person. When you consume carnivorous animals, especially those that tear apart that prey, like lions and tigers and vultures, you see there is an effect of what you consume. on your own nature. If you consume these things, then that savagery and that beastliness would also be transferred in us, and the resultant aggression and anger and the things that we find for people or nations who consume these things is very evident. So things which are carnivorous and those carnivorous animals which tear apart their prey, they have been prohibited because of the fact that they are a symbol of savagery and beastliness, and the Quran and the Prophet do not want that this be transferred into human beings. But the question with the pig was, or the swine was, that it could have gone both ways. And because of the fact that it is also, it is also something which could be regarded as a carnivore and a herbivore, so the verdict of the Sharia was needed. Similarly, what about blood, which are slaughtered in a way that all their blood is not drained out? Can they be eaten? I mean, some part of it might get stuck with the meat inside. So, is the blood of such animals impure, as indeed are their feces and urine? That's another question that could have arisen. And if animals are slaughtered by taking the name of someone other than God, can they still be eaten? So, these are some of the fundamental questions about which human beings could have been in confusion and could not have come with a definite and a decisive answer. So, the Almighty guided mankind in this matter through His prophets and informed them that the flesh of the swine, blood, meat of dead animals, and animals which are slaughtered in the name of someone other than Allah are also impure and unclean, and people should therefore abstain from them. So, in this regard, we have to understand that these four things have been primarily discussed by the Sharia, not because it is something that, it's like a list given to us. It's like about things that we could not have, we were already known about them, but because we could have faltered regarding their ultimate fate, whether we would have regarded them to be prohibited or not, because the rest of the things our nature can clearly decide. About these four things, our nature and intellect could have faltered. So the Quran at some places actually has used this expression, Kulla adidu fima uhiya ilayya, which means I do not find anything forbidden in what God has revealed to me. And of course, at some instances, it has used this Arabic expression, which is innama, and it means only and only. So, if by use of these expressions, it has stated that only these are the four things which are prohibited by the Almighty. And now let us look at the Quran, how it actually states these prohibited items. It says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum washkuru lillahi in kuntum iyyahu ta'budun. إنما حرم عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير وما أهل به لغير الله. Believers, eat of the wholesome things which we have provided you, and be grateful to God alone if it is Him you worship. He has forbidden you only carrion, which is of course the pig, the swine, meat of the swine, blood, and the flesh of the swine. Carrion, of course, is maita, which means a dead animal. It's not swine, it's maita, means dead animal, blood, and the flesh of swine, and also any flesh that is slaughtered in the name of someone other than God. Someone other than God. And then another verse, this is from Surah Anam, verse 145, it says something similar. قُلْ لَا أَجِدُ فِي مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ مُحَرَّمًا عَلَى طَاعِمٍ يَطْعَمُهُ إِلَّا أَنْ يَكُونَ مَيْتَةً أَوْ دَمًا مَسْفُوحًا أَوْ لَحْمَ خِنْزِيرٍ فَإِنَّهُ رِجْسٌ أَوْ فِسْقًا أُحِلَّ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِهِ. Say, I find not in what has been revealed to me through inspiration forbidden to a person who eats things which are edible, unless it be carrion or blood poured forth, or the flesh of swine, because all these are unclean or in disobedience to God, animals slaughtered in someone else's name. So you can see that in this verse of Surah Anam also what is being said is that these are the only four things that are prohibited. Now, as I just said, that there are certain narratives which say that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had also prohibited the meat of beasts which have sharp canine teeth, and birds which have claws and tentacles in their feet. Now, it is evident from these details that I have just divulged before you, as has been explained by Ustaz Ghamidi, that as far as these things are concerned, they are merely a delineation of the innate guidance found within human nature. People have erroneously regarded this delineation of divine guidance as the Sharia, even though it has no link with the prohibition of the Sharia stated in the Quran. So, in other words, if the if the Ahadith say that birds having claws and tentacles in their feet, they are prohibited. So, the Prophet is not adding something to the list which the Quran has given. It is just telling us that these belong to the same category as savages. I mean, as animals which people don't consume. So, if the Prophet is telling us that birds having claws and tentacles in their feet and animals which have sharp canine teeth are also prohibited, he's not adding a fifth element to this list. He's just explaining what our innate guidance or our human nature already knows, and that is beasts which are basically savage, which we know to be very well know that they are savage and they have that beastliness in them, and if they are consumed like vultures and tigers and elephants, so they will transfer the same beastliness to those who consume them. So when the Prophet was making a list of these things or delineating a list of these things, he was not adding something to what the Quran was telling us. He was just explaining what is already found in human nature. The abhorrence of these things is already found in human nature. He was just explaining them. So this is how he has explained that if we take into account the fact that the Prophet has not added to the list which is given by the Quran, he has just actually said that just as the Quran points out the four major things in which human intellect would have faltered or could have faltered, as because the rest of what is required to be eaten or not to be eaten is clearly known in our fitra, in our nature. So this is basically an explanation of human nature, how human nature would be averse to birds having claws and tentacles in their feet to be consumed. So he says that the issue of hadith abrogating the Quran or limiting the Quran or adding the Quran, as far as this hadith is concerned, does not even arise. Now, let us move on to the second hadith. And this hadith also is something that seemingly adds to the content of the Quran. The Quran has prohibited certain relations, and in those relations, the Prophet has added, it seems, a few more relations. For example, he has said that foster relations are also clearly prohibited. And he has also said that as far as the aunt and the niece are concerned, they cannot be combined in marriage alone. Of course, we do not find this in the Quran. So people think, or our scholars think, that this is something which is which of course cannot be in any way accepted as something which is part of the Quran. It is like an addition to the Quran. So this style of the Quran, of course, Ustad Ghamidi says, is because of the fact that we have not understood a certain element of the Quran, and that is that at times the Quran suppresses certain clauses, something which is automatically understood, something which the reader knows. So if he knows those clauses, then the Quran does not mention them. And as we will come to these ahadiths, let's wait a little while, but let me explain how Ustad Ghamidi has said that by not understanding a style of the Quran in which certain obvious things are suppressed, we tend to think that the Prophet has added some more relations as prohibited. So if you look at this this verse which is being displayed before you, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُمْ, and all the beasts that roam in the earth on their feet, and all the birds that fly on their wings in the sky with both their wings, are but communities like your own. So I'm now going to read out the text from Ustad Ghamidi. He has explained how in this verse there are certain suppressions, and those suppressions, if understood, will clearly tell us that these are understood to be present, but they are not expressed. So he says, a little deliberation shows that in the verse above, an ellipsis, which means a suppression of parallel phrases, has occurred because of the presence of the word, of the expression fil ard, which means in the earth. In the first part of the sentence, there is an ellipsis, which means suppression, of course, of its parallel expression, which is fis sama. So the opposite of fil ard, which means in the land or in the earth, would be in the sky. So because of the fact that fil ard is present in the first part, the second part, which should have mentioned fis sama, is not mentioned. I mean, because it is understood to be present. Similarly, because of the presence of the expression yatiru bi janahayhi, which means fly on their wings, in the second part of the sentence, an ellipsis of its parallel expression tadubbu ala arjuliha, which means roam on their legs, has occurred in the first part of the sentence. Though this style is not present in the English language, it exists abundantly in classical Arabic. In Surah Nisa, where Quran has mentioned women with whom marriage is prohibited, two instances of this style can be seen. So we now come to those areas in which the prohibited relatives are mentioned, and this style will be evident. And what exactly is the style? The style actually means that clauses and phrases and expressions which are understood to be present, they are not expressed by the Quran. So in technical terms, in the Arabic language, this is what we call hasf. Hasf means ellipsis or suppression. So what is understood is not expressed. What is automatically understood is not given expression. So if we are able to gauge this fact, and of course this is a slightly technical example, you may need to reflect it or maybe listen to this once again, but the point that he has made is that understood expressions which are part of the verse, especially in parallel clauses, they are suppressed, and the translation of course can be done with by expressing that. So now let us come to the Quranic verse in which he has applied this, or he thinks that this similar expression has been adopted. So it says, وَأُمَّهَاتُكُمُ اللَّاتِي أَرْضَعْنَكُمْ وَأَخَوَاتُكُم مِّنَ الرَّضَاعَةِ, and marry not your mothers who have suckled you and your sisters through fosterage. And then it says, وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ إِلَّا مَا قَدْ سَلَفَ, and also two sisters in wedlock at the same time, except for what has already happened. So what exactly does this example entail? What are these two expressions showing us? They are actually telling us that what the Prophet has said is something which is exactly what is understood to be present in the Quranic verse. So if we look at these two verses one by one, let us do that one by one, and we take a closer look. So together with foster mothers, if you look at the first expression, ummahatukum allati arda'nakum wa akhawatukum min ar-radha'. So if you look at this first verse, together with foster mothers, foster sisters are also regarded as relations prohibited for marriage. You see, it says akhawatukum min ar-radha', and then it stops here. I mean, it tells us that your mothers who have suckled you, your foster mothers, they are prohibited to be married, and also the sisters from this relationship, which means mothers who have suckled you, if they have a daughter, then they are also prohibited from marriage. Now, had the directive ended with foster mothers, nothing further could have been understood from it. Nothing. However, if the relationship of fosterage with the mother makes her daughter a foster sister, then it is but logical to regard other relations of the foster mother to be also included in this directive, isn't it? So if being suckled through the same mother can make someone a foster sister, then why can't the sister of the foster mother be regarded as the maternal aunt? So if the daughter is prohibited, similarly, her own sister, who would be the maternal aunt of the fostered child, and her husband as the father, the sister of her husband as the paternal aunt, her daughter's daughter and her son's daughter as nieces. So it would mean that all those relations which are prohibited in marriage are also prohibited in fosterage. So what is being said is akhawatukum min ar-radha'. Actually, this just one expression is said, is actually stated that your daughters from fosterage. But that one expression, daughters from fosterage, automatically includes other relations, like we just enumerated. The nieces of that, for example, the sister of the person or the woman who had suckled someone would be the maternal aunt. So that would mean, although the Quran does not mention the maternal aunt, but because one relation has been mentioned, which says akhawatukum min ar-radha'a, sisters out of fosterage, and the rest has been just left to our intellect to understand. The other list would be akhawatukum min ar-radha'a, which means sisters from fosterage. You can add to this that mothers also, a mother's sister from fosterage would mean that the maternal aunt would also be prohibited, and similarly the father also. But the mother and the father have not been mentioned, or the khala or the khalu have not been mentioned, as we say in the Urdu language, because of the fact that the sisters have also been mentioned. So this mention has actually made it understood that the rest are also present. Now look at the second verse. It says, وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ إِلَّا مَا قَدْ سَلَفَ. So it says, if you look at this, and also two sisters in wedlock. Now, if you look at this verse, it would mean that if combining two sisters in wedlock is a lewd thing, because the Quran says it's something that should not be done. As far as the relationship of marriage is concerned, then combining a woman with a brother's daughter in wedlock or with a sister's daughter in wedlock is like combining a mother and daughter in wedlock. So that would mean that the paternal aunt or the maternal aunt with the person herself or the girl herself would be amounting to gathering or combining two relations which are prohibited, just as two sisters are. So what is being said here is that if you look at the Quranic verse that is, which says وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ, then Ustad Ghamidi says that the rest of the part is actually suppressed, and the rest of the part would be وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ وَخَالَتِهَا الْمَرْأَةِ بَيْنَ الْمَرْأَةِ وَعَمَّتِهَا وَبَيْنَ وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ. I mean, this whole expression has been wrongly stated here because of the non-alignment of the in the text. So basically, it says وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ. That is one thing, that you do not actually combine two sisters, and then وَالْمَرْأَةِ وَخَالَتِهَا, you do not combine a woman with her maternal aunt, وَأَمَّتِهَا, and also with her paternal aunt. So that is something which is already understood to be present. So because of the fact that these are understood there, so they were actually not mentioned. So now if we look at this fact that the Quran has actually not mentioned foster relationship, all the foster relationship, it has just mentioned one category after the mother, which is the foster sister, then we will come to know that the rest of the relations are already present. So therefore, now if the Prophet is reported to have said, look at the first part, يَحْرُمُ مِنَ الرَّضَاعَ مَا يَحْرُمُ مِنَ الْوِلَادَةِ. Every relationship which is prohibited for marriage owing to lineage is also prohibited owing to fosterage. Now, this is a narrative which people think has added to the Quran, has added, because the Quran does not say, seemingly, that all the relationships which are prohibited for marriage according to lineage, they are also prohibited according to fosterage, because the Quran has just said, ummahatukum allati arda'nakum wa akhawatukum min ar-radha'a. So it has only said the mothers who fostered you and the daughters of those mothers, but the rest have not been mentioned. So we've just seen that even though the rest have not been mentioned, because of the style of the Arabic language in which understood things, they are left to the discretion of the reader, they are already present. So Ustad Ghamidi says that the Prophet is not adding anything to the Quran. He is just stating what was the obvious. He is just stating that every relationship which is prohibited for marriage owing to lineage is also prohibited owing to fosterage. So just as the foster mother is prohibited, the real mother is prohibited. The foster father is prohibited, is just like the real father. Although the word of the foster father is not mentioned. It's not mentioned. The mother is only mentioned and the daughter is only mentioned. But common sense shows that this is like the Quran telling us that you can understand the rest yourself. So if the Prophet says that the raza'a, fosterage, prohibits in the same way as lineage prohibits, then he is not adding anything to the Quran. He is just explaining something that was suppressed in the Quran. Similarly, look at the second narrative. It says, لا يجمع بين المرأة وعمتها ولا بين المرأة وخالتها. Neither a lady and her paternal aunt nor a lady and her maternal aunt can be combined in wedlock. Ustad Ghamidi has already shown that وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ, which means that you cannot actually have two sisters in wedlock at the same time. But the rest of the part after it is also suppressed, which means that you cannot combine a lady with her maternal aunt and a lady with her paternal aunt, because that would be equally lewd as two sisters are. So in this way, he has actually shown that this narrative also, the second narrative also, is not something which is adding to the Quran. It is not adding to the Quran as people contend. People think that the Prophet has added this relationship of a maternal aunt with the lady herself and the paternal aunt with the lady herself to be prohibited. No, he's not adding anything. He's just stating the obvious that was left to the discretion of the human intellect in that part. So we have so far covered two ahadiths, which, according to our jurists, they add to the Quran. They alter the directive of the Quran. They specify the Quran. And in both these cases, as you can clearly see, Ustad Ghamidi says that ahadiths are not adding or confining or in any way abrogating the Quran. If we looked at the first example, in which if the Prophet said that beasts which have canine teeth or claws, birds which have claws are also prohibited, he was not adding to the list of the Quran. He was just delineating human nature, about which we are already averse. Human nature is already averse to such beasts being consumed. And in the second, we have seen that fosterage is mentioned in a specific way in the Quran. But the Prophet has mentioned that all relationships with fosterage, all relationships that are found on the basis of fosterage are forbidden in the same way as those are forbidden in the case of lineage. So again, this narrative is not something which is adding to the Quran in any way. It is just explaining a part of that. And we have also seen that if the Prophet has said that a lady cannot be combined with a maternal aunt or a paternal aunt, then this is exactly the same when you see that antajma'u bain al-ukhtayn, that two sisters in wedlock cannot be combined because it's a lewd thing. So the Prophet has just extended by analogy that if combining two sisters at the same time in wedlock is a lewd thing, then combining a lady with a paternal aunt or a maternal aunt is equally the same thing. So he has just extended that, and of course that is something that is already suppressed in this Quranic verse. I'm not going to cover the rest of the four examples today. I think that we need to chew upon what I've just described before you. Slightly technical, but hopefully if you can read through this again or listen to this again, you might find it very important. And the reason that this is something very important is that now this is a very, very important debate in our Islamic thought. And this debate actually revolves around the fact that ahadith seem to abrogate, which means cancel, or limit the scope of ahadith of the Quran. I mean, ahadith abrogate or limit the scope of the Quran. So this is a whole point of view, and it has been derived because these ahadith seemingly do so. But Ustad Ghamidi has shown, and before him Ustad Hamiduddin Farahi and his Ustad Ghamidi's teacher, Ustad Amin and Islahi, all these three illustrious scholars have shown that it's just a lack of concentration or maybe understanding of these narratives that we have come to the conclusion that ahadith is adding something to the Quran. It's not the case that ahadith are adding anything to the Quran. They are either explaining something which is already found in the Quran or explaining, as the case we've just seen here in the first example, some purport of human nature. So because of the fact that this is a very important discussion, and if we are able to understand this, we will be able to also gauge the fact that ahadith have never ever abrogated the Quran. And whenever people have thought, in fact, that they have abrogated the Quran, it is only and only because they have not reflected properly enough or sufficiently, and they place these ahadith directives to be independent of the Quran. So inshallah, we'll cover the rest of the four examples in our future sessions. And if you now have any questions regarding what we have just covered, please raise them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our first question asks, can we differ in interpreting the verse based on our intellect upon which the companions have agreed unanimously? And we have clear evidence for it too.
First of all, there is not a single example in which we can say that the companions have, agreed on its interpretation. There is not a single example, and it is also humanly impossible that there could have been such an example. What the companions actually agree upon is the verse itself, the text of the Quran. So all the companions agree that yes, this is the text of the Quran and this has been received by the Prophet and we are going to transfer it. As far as the interpretation of that text is concerned, that is based on human intellect, and we don't have all the Prophet's intellect itself, or even of his Sahaba, saying that, well, this is a verse that on which all of us have the same interpretation and therefore it has to be accepted. There's not a single example. It's just a hypothetical thing that people have come up with. So, in effect, what is to be done is that you understand or interpret the Quranic verse according to, of course, how the principles of interpretation tell you. And if you find a difference of interpretation between two scholars, all that you need to do is weigh the opinions and arguments of both these interpretations and see which you seem to be more in conformity with, you find to be more in conformity with your intellect, and then you can just give that preference, and this process should go on. So remember, interpretation of the text has been left to human beings. The Prophet did so, but it's not that he interpreted the whole of the Quran. Very few ahadiths are narrated from him that actually explain some part of the Quran. Similarly, you'll not find the Sahaba doing that in abundance. The whole of the Quran, we don't find any complete explanation. Yes, from the Tabi'un, which means the students of the Sahaba, we do find a number of statements, but then they too also they cannot be reliably traced back to the Prophet himself. So all in all, we have to understand the text of the Quran from its context and from its language. And if there is a difference of opinion, then that difference of opinion has to be resolved through arguments and reasoning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, since we're discussing the relationships that are prohibited for marriage, somebody has heard from the Hanafi scholars that if one touches any woman with bad intentions, that particular woman becomes haram forever. Since that person is going to be meeting with their paternal aunt, they're worried about shaking hands with them.
Not a question at all. It's absolutely baseless, and I don't find anywhere the Hanafis saying so. I think it's a wrong ascription to the Hanafi scholars themselves. It's not the right. They never said it to the best of my knowledge, and they could not have said this thing because it goes against the Quran.
They're saying that fear reinforces what they're ignoring to not feel because they're going to marry their cousin.
You see, the thing is that if you are driven by fear, and if you're driven by doubts and fears, then of course all these things, they creep in. You must not be driven by fear. You have to be driven by arguments, proof, and reasoning. If you allow yourself to be overcome with fear, then this is a never-ending process. It's just going to take you into so many different labyrinths of I would say deviance that you would continue to stumble all the way. The thing is that you must not let fear creep into the understanding of the Quran. And also remember this, that if you interpret something out of your sincerity, you believe in something to be true, God is not going to punish you unless you do something wrong deliberately.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, if hadith about marital relations with fosterage did not reach us, then how can we know that the prohibition only with the help of Qur'an? How are we knowing that principle of hazaf is being applied here?
All scholars of the Muslim Ummah, they know that this principle exists in the Quran, and if either of the scholars would have interpreted this, he would have presented his or her opinion, and the rest would have either differed with him or not. So the only thing is that here we have the knowledge of the Prophet being given to us, and that knowledge is not something which the Prophet has given, in a sense that it is something that we don't know. It is the statement of the obvious. So had the Prophet not stated the obvious, it could very well have been that some other scholar of the Ummah might have stated this, because it's a very obvious thing. But because the Prophet took lead in stating something which was very obvious, so of course this is like relying on what he has said, and also studying what he has said in conformity that it is so close to the Quran that whatever he has said is something that is the absolute truth. So a simple answer is that in the absence of prophetic knowledge, because you see, this is a ishtihad of the Prophet, or the understanding of the Prophet. In the absence of that, any other scholar, had he been given this chance, or he had deliberated on these verses, could have come up. I'm not saying should have or would have. Essentially, he might have come up with the same interpretation, and that is all. So if the Prophet has given us something and we can reliably trace it back, it's like a bonus for us. But that does not mean that in the absence of that interpretation, others would never have been able to reach this. There might well have been a chance or case that others would have been able to derive this as well, because basically this is like a derivation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. A follow up on the first question that we had. They're saying that this whole thing is called Hurmatul Musaharat, and that is that the daughter and mother of that woman become haram to marry if one touches with bad intentions, and that applies to any women. So now, as soon as they meet their own mahram auntie, they feel those bad intentions because of fear.
I just replied to that. I mean, if you let fear dominate you in understanding religion, then that's what's going to happen. You'll become superstitious, you'll become jittery, you'll always become, instead of understanding things through your intellect, you'll leave them to your emotions, and fear is the biggest emotion. So you have to give up that approach of understanding religion. The fear has only come upon you because you have not understood the purport of the Quran. Someone has told you something and you have just blindly trusted that person. For heaven's sake, see whether that whatever he has said or she has said, wherever you derived it, whether it is in conformity with the Quran. I mean, touching someone, does that go to this extent? I mean, does the Quran ever say that? Or, I mean, can you even think about what has been said, that you touch someone and that touch is going to create this whole prohibition? So I think that as I said, we have to go back to the basics and see that in such a case, you have to trust the Quran and not trust your emotions or your fear.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Calling for more questions. If we don't have any more questions, we'll be ending the session soon, inshallah. You may
And
raise your hand.
in that case, we can also take some general questions if you don't have relevant questions to the topic.
All right, so calling for all questions, general, not related to the topic, or related to the topic. You can either raise your hand or type them in the chat. If you are going to type them in the chat, I request you to please type it all together and not send it in fragmented sentences. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. I'm Aisha. I'm Aisha from Islamabad. I have a question.
All right, go on, please.
Okay, my question is this law you just explained that a man cannot have two sisters in marriage. So
Yes.
maybe my question is not relevant to the discussion, but I just want to know, is this law also like a part of law of all the Muslim countries? Like in Pakistan, no one can marry two sisters at the same time. And in
Yes,
Arab
this is
countries,
part of
this is also
everywhere. This is a unanimously held law. And it's not that, I
okay.
mean, we are saying this. The Quran has explicitly said, وَأَن تَجْمَعُ بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ, which means that two sisters married at the same time are not allowed, because this amounts to be lewdness and a lustful attitude. Because it's against modesty, it exposes the two
Yes.
women in a way which is inappropriate. So, of course, if one of the sisters dies, then this is not the case. I mean, you can marry the sister, but it's not that. It's the only thing is that you cannot marry two sisters at the same time.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ammar Rasul, please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Sahab.
Right, salam.
Dr. Sahab, my question was regarding this verse that came up in a previous session. I think it was the last session where this verse was narrated, which said that if people are persecuted in a land, then the angels will take their life away, and the angels will ask them, "Why did you not, travel from this land or do hijrat?" And then these people will have no answer, and they will be sent to hell. Dr. Saab, the question that arose in my mind was about the Ahmadis living in Pakistan. Obviously, they are religiously persecuted, and they obviously believe that they are Muslims, and in religion or Islam or God has given us no grounds to doubt their sincerity. And so clearly they are religiously persecuted, but many of them do not leave for one reason or another. Yet they are not allowed to have azan or even sometimes follow the Eid rituals. So will they come under this law where the Prophet,
I mean, you see,
the angels
always remember that the application of a verse is something that is a specific thing, and the circumstances of that specific nature is they are mostly between God and the person or the people themselves. So we don't know the excuse that they have. It's not possible for every single Ahmadi brother or sister to migrate from one place to another, and at the same time, I mean, it's not something which is remember practically possible. So whether it's practically possible or not is a question that they have to contemplate, and we just cannot give a verdict from outside. They know this verse of the Quran, and they should know that if they are being persecuted in the name of religion, then if that persecution is not making them follow religion the way it should be followed in the optimum way, then is it the fact that they have an alternative place to go? So remember, when the Quran was being revealed, the matters were very simple. A person could migrate from that place and go to a different part. There was no visa, there was no passport, of course, there were no traveling restrictions, and people could just go from one place to another and live in peace. Today, this I mean, there's a lot of complication and complexity. So, given this complication and complexity, and given the fact that they should try their best to observe the basic precepts of religion, it's the question that they need to tackle with themselves. Also, one important thing might be that many of them might be thinking that they are being able to practice religion, I mean, without being persecuted. For example, you see, congregational prayer, of course, this could be one thing that they are not able to do so. But remember, the congregational prayer in itself is not an obligation. It's like it's like something that you do beyond an obligation. So the thing is that, are they not allowed to pray? I don't think that's the case. Are they not allowed to, for example, fast? Again, that's not the case. So you see, you have to look at the directives also. That maybe in all probability, the directives which are absolutely mandatory for them, they still being able to observe them? So that's also a question that we need to understand, and maybe they have this before them as well.
So the reason why I asked this question in the first place, like obviously I do not want to get into whether they are religiously persecuted in Pakistan or not. My opinion on the matter might be different to yours, but my question is that the overall law or the directive in this matter just seems very counterintuitive and harsh, like in the sense that people are being persecuted, and obviously immigration or moving away from the land that your motherland, where you have roots, is not a simple matter. But whoever does not do so is going to be sent to hell. I'm just saying that this law, for some reason,
I mean, if
you could
yes.
Shine some light on the inside on why there is such a law to begin with in the first place.
I mean, you see, we have to understand why the Almighty has placed this. Of course, we cannot in any way alter or have our own say in this interpretation. It is the Quran which has told us that if you are being persecuted, and that persecution is not making you practice religion, which is of course an obligation. For example, if I'm not allowed to pray, which is my first and basic obligation towards God, which of course we find is not the case with the Ahmadis, I would say, then that is a very, very severe matter. It means that my first expression with God, which is expressing my thanksgiving and remembrance to God through praying, is in jeopardy. I cannot even pray. So if I cannot even pray, then, and also I have a place where I can go and pray. You see, the thing is that it's not as much as the fact that you cannot pray, as is the case that you can pray, but you're not making enough effort to go to that place. So it is here basically, the question here is of slackness and indifference, that you can fulfill all your obligations of religion very well. And because of a little slackness, or maybe a little laziness, or maybe out of little fact that, well, why should I leave my home or my hometown? Because you see, religion is something, or faith is something that should hold priority in our dealings. So this is a question which the Quran has raised actually, that is your faith more important to you, or the manifestation of your faith, or your belongings, or the place that you live? So I think that we have to understand that it's like a question that the Quran has said, that if you are able to migrate to a place where you can fully practice your religion, then what's the reason that you're not doing so? So that reason is something, if it is legitimate enough, if it is something that is a very strong excuse on your part, then obviously the Almighty would be hopefully forgiving you. But if that excuse or pretext is flimsy or frail or doesn't hold much ground, then this is what the Quran has said, that it actually means or amounts to something that you have not given religion enough importance and enough preference in your life. You've had the chance to go out of your place and still practice it freely in the way God wanted you to practice, but you never took that step.
Thank you very much. The next question asks, is political persecution also considered under the command of Hijrah, or is this limited to only religious persecution?
Only religious persecution. I mean, political persecution, it depends what you mean by that. I mean, what exactly could be the form of political persecution, because that would only mean that you're not allowed to express your political views. It's that the state is like a tyrannical state, it's like an authoritative state, and you are just not allowed to express anything that relates to politics. That itself, of course, is something that is unbecoming and wrong. But in that case, you're still able to practice religion. So the persecution that is being talked about here is that you were given a mandate, and that was to practice God's religion on earth. And that mandate could have been honored by a little effort, and you did not do so. So that is basically, it relates to God's religion. It does not relate to anything else. Politics, of course, is not the ambit here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We have a longish question about how do you overcome hypersexuality? Again, we've had the same line of questioning before where somebody says that they have had a lot of fatwas regarding gender interactions, and when they interact with their relatives, they feel those sensations that they don't want to feel, and they know by their fatwas that it's unnatural if you interact without having any temptations. So now any interaction that they have makes them feel aroused, and they are very confused between their intentions or other whispers that they have in their head. Like even a normal polite conversation leads to their arousal. And
so the thing is, yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
And so they said that going through the Sira, they found a lot of evidence for gender interaction in Prophet's time. But when they ask a local person, they say that they must feel these arousal thoughts, and that's why they're prohibited from taking a look at people in the first place. So now,
So I think, yeah, go ahead.
Last bit, so they're wondering if they're doing something against human nature, if they think they're having a healthy interaction with people of the opposite gender.
As I said, I think that I would advise the person who was asked this question to please base his or her actions on what the Quran has said, and forget about what the fatwas that he is getting, because some of these fatwas are, totally misleading, and they are not based on the Quran. They are primarily based on some of the cultural, I would say, norms of a society that perhaps the people who are giving that fatwa are aware of, or maybe they are akin to. So if you look at the Quran does not give you this, this picture at all, and it does not. It in fact instills you with a lot of confidence that you can. For example, at one instance, it says "Antakulu jamiyan aw ashtata," that you can, sit with people of the opposite gender and have food with them, and if you want, you can do it separately. There is no restriction on that. And then look at how Surah Nur treats those restrictions. All it says is that you must control your eyes from taking undue liberty, and at the same time wear proper decent clothes. So these are the two restrictions which are given both to men and both to women and women, and that is all. And one more restriction is imposed on women, and that is that they should not display their finery, they should not embellish themselves except those limbs which are already exposed. That is all. Everything else is cultural, or maybe it has preferential, I would say, expression, because a particular person has a particular inclination, but that inclination should not be made religion at all. The Quran has discussed this matter in detail. So I think the questioner should rely on the interpretation of these verses only. And the second thing is that if this is something which has become a fear or maybe an obsession, then it might well be a good thing if he or she can show himself or herself to a doctor also, because the doctor also will treat the person not in a way that he's going to explain what religion tells him or her, but in the sense that when something becomes a part of your nature, it makes you depressive or it makes you obsessive, then there are certain drugs, there are certain medicines that can help a person calm him down, calm her down, soothe and relax that person, and make that person realize that, I mean, you have to live a normal life and not be overcome with fear. So I think these two things should be done in tandem. On the one hand, consult a good therapist who can help you in calming you down and letting you know how to live in life, how to live a life of in which there is no such consternation or apprehension. And secondly, rely on the Quran. And how, I mean, had the Quran not discussed this, there could have been a lot of questions that might have gone unsolved. But because the Quran has made it a point to discuss every possible detail of gender interaction, so why do we need to do anything else? Why do we need to go to anyone else? And I think that if you could just consult how Ustaz Ghamidi or Ustaz Islahi have treated these verses of Surah Nur, in particular where this mention has been made, that should suffice. And if that is not sufficient, you can always personally contact me, and I'll try to explain things even more.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, are you allowed to wear dresses that expose the shoulders?
You see, if you look at the Quranic injunctions that relate to dress, it says "Yahfazna furujahunna," which means protect your private parts. Protection means, I mean, it's not said that you cover your private parts. It says "Yahfazna," which means protect them. So it's more than just covering them. It would amount to saying that you cover those parts also which are adjacent to your private parts, something that fall adjacent. For example, if women they are wearing half sleeves, then of course this should not go beyond this area of your elbow, because it's adjacent to their bosom, which is of course their private part. So something which is adjacent to their chest should also be covered, because the words of the Quran are "Yahfazna furujahunna." And so yes, my answer would be that if they are covering until the half of their arm, which is like until their shoulder, then that would be exactly in line with what the Quran is telling us, that you protect your sexual organs, and that protection actually means that you cover not only those organs but parts which are adjacent, or limbs which are adjacent.
Dr. Saleem, this is my personal question. So, like, if you're wearing a t-shirt, though, it's not like your boobs are gonna show. Like,
Mhm.
is that bad too? Like, do you need to have your full sleeves, or 3/4 sleeves?
As I said, I mean, if you look at the Quran, you see the Quran. First of all, we have to understand the Quran does not demarcate these things. It's not that it ascertains exactly what is to be done. It uses a certain word, and that word has to be understood by human beings. And as a result of that understanding, you form a particular picture. So the Quran has just used one word, and that is Hifzul Furuj. Actually, Hifzul Furuj means protect your private parts. That's it. So scholars have come up with different understandings of this expression, and to me, the best understanding is the fact that the word "yahfazna furujahunna" or "yahfuzu furujahum" actually means not only to cover your sexual organs, but organs or limbs which are adjacent to them also. So, if you look at a woman's body, you'll find, of course, that the bosom that she has, the adjacent things or the adjacent limbs would be the arms as well. So if you look at that, so to me it would be that half of the arm should be covered if
Okay,
you look
thank
at
you
it
for
in
that.
this way.
Thank you for that explanation. So, a follow-up that we have in the chat is asking, so would this also apply for legs? So, a skirt that reaches the knees
Correct.
should be
Correct.
sufficient.
Yes. I mean, that should be one of the areas that the knees or just below the knees should be sufficient. And so this is as far as the obligation is concerned. Right? Remember, there is a part which is an obligatory part or a mandatory part, and anything which is over and above them. For example, if a woman does not stop here, I mean, she also covers her forearms, then it could be that she is going some I mean, she's being even more modest than is required. So it's like something that she's doing becoming more sensitive towards modesty. Similarly, if she covers below her below her ankles, I mean below her knees, to be more precise, then until the knees is something that is an obligation. But anything which is below the knees would be doing something which is in line with modesty. And the more you do it, of course, the more modest you would become. Because you see, the Quran, the way it presents dressing and attire is in which it says that only limbs which should be exposed should remain exposed. And when it says that you are allowed to expose them, particularly if you are wearing any finery, any embellishment on them, then you don't need to cover them. So this gives us a line that except for those limbs that are automatically exposed, and which of course include your face, your hands, and your feet, anything which is worn on them as embellishment, you need not cover. However, any other embellishment which is found on other limbs, except that these three limbs, has to be covered. So this gives us a general approach that the Quran actually wants us to dress in a certain way, and that way, of course, would be that where the obligation is, and where you can, I mean, do something which is more than obligation, and that would be counted as a more modest behavior, I would say.
Thank you. A follow-up is the knee below not only applicable for men only? Is below the knee?
No, I mean, that's something which we talk about both the genders.
Okay, thank you. And so another question is asking, what's the aura of a woman in general?
As I said, you see, the word aura, again, this is something that has been left to ijtihad. It's not that the Quran or the Prophet or someone has said that, well, this is the aura. The Quran has just used one word, as I just said earlier on, yahfazna furujahum, protect your sexual organs. Protect, it's not hide or cover, it says protect your sexual organs. So that protection is now a word, and my understanding of that protection would be the aura. And your understanding would be the aura. I mean, this could vary from person to person, but as I said, there are certain people who think that the aura is just, for example, in the case of women, if they cover their chests, that would be sufficient. If they cover their, the other private part, that is sufficient. But you see, that would only be sufficient had the Quran used words to the effect, cover them. Something like yugattina, ghatta means to cover. But the Quran never used these words. It says protect them. So hafaza or hafiza is more than covering. So that more, whatever your understanding of that more, is the aura. And I think that is left to your own understanding. And so our fuqaha or our jurists have tried to actually ascertain this hafzul furuj. And so they say that basically, if you cover yourself, if men are covered from their, such that they are covered unto their knees, from their private part unto the knees, then that is sufficient. And for women, it is if they cover themselves such that anything beyond that, their hands and their feet and their their face can be left exposed. Other than that, everything should be covered. So that is what the understanding of the jurists is. So that, as I said, aura is not a word. It's not something that the Quran is defined or given you exact demarcations. This is how people have understood what aura should be. The Quran has just used the word hafiza, which means protect. All the rest is a human understanding of the word hafiza.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. What products count as hair embellishments? So like a hair shine or hair dyes, would those be hair embellishments, or does it need to be a physical product?
So again, this is a matter of ijtihad, this is a matter of understanding. So Quran has not pointed out any of these things. It has left them to your own understanding. All that it has said is la yubdina zinatahunna. Do not embellish yourselves except on limbs which are such and such. So that word embellishment, zina, is the Quranic word. So what is zina? Zina means ma yuzayyanu bihi, something that you add to your already existing limb to make it more beautiful, to beautify something that already is there. So that is the sense. Now, it is now up to you to understand what that beautification is. That whenever you add something to something that's already there, that would count as zina.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We have time for just 2 more questions, which we'll take one from the chat and then one from the raised hands, and then we'll be ending the session, inshallah. Bisma, please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Saleem.
Walaikum assalam.
So my question is that because Quran is such a personal religion in the context that it's so much between a person and his God. When we understand something through ijtihad, is it also possible if somebody feels that they're not attracting attention by wearing something? Is it possible that they can go ahead and do that and it follows the same principle as to what the Quran said? Because it's so personal, I feel sometimes.
I think you have to understand that the law of attraction or the reason of attraction that is often given by our jurists is never ever mentioned in the Quran. I mean, this is something which our jurists have come up with. I don't know from where, that the whole these directives that relate to gender interaction, they rise, or they are fundamentally based on why you can how you can make yourself unattractive to the opposite gender. That's never the import of the Quran. The Quran has stated extremely explicitly. It says, "Zalika azka lakum wa athhar," that these directives have been given to you for your own personal purification. It's not
Got
the
it.
attraction of the opposite gender. That is already taken care of, because the Quran says that for that attraction, you have to restrain your gaze. If you feel that attraction, then restrain your gaze. It's that women are not told, or men are not told to, do certain things simply because the other gender is going to get attracted. It's because it is something that is more akin, close to their own self purification, that these directives have been given. So I think this is a fundamental shift. And if you don't realize this, then you'll end up always thinking, what am I going to do that's going to make me unattractive for the opposite gender? That's not
Right.
mentioned in the Quran
Right.
anyway.
Okay, that is so wise. Thank you so much, Dr. Saleem. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last question asks, is psychological manipulation done via members of masjid allowed if done with good intentions of maintaining the status quo of Muslim beliefs? For example, the aqidah of ijma' is solidified by the tactic of propaganda, which is saying many lies so many times that it becomes the truth, which is a type of psychological manipulation of public opinion. Does that make it okay?
I mean, manipulation of any sort does not make anything okay. I mean, if you manipulate people's minds, if you manipulate their emotions, I can only answer in principle, that's not the right attitude. You need to educate people. You need to create awareness in them. The right way would be to make them aware, to make them mature, to make them understand, and to reason out things. When you manipulate their minds, seldom is that intention very pure. I mean, seldom can be said that you have a very pure intention. Often the intention is that you'd like you have some agenda before you, have some thing before you, and that manipulation is going to serve that purpose. So I think if that intention is there, then no amount of manipulation would be correct. It should be always with the case that we try to educate people, we try to create awareness in them, we try to make them individuals who can take decisions, and if they make mistakes, then they can retake them, take another decision, come to another opinion, and this is how their intellect grows. So everything that causes your intellect to nourish and grow is non-manipulative, I would say, and that is the right approach.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem, for another wonderful session, and thanks to all the participants for coming through and asking your questions and participating. Inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow in another session of textual study of the Quran, and until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.